I've been reading these stories for a while now, and I thought it was about time that I would finally share mine. What happened to me isn't something I've spoken about, not to colleagues, not to supervisors, not even to my closest friends, but I need to tell someone, even if it's just strangers on the internet. Maybe then I can finally put it behind me. It all began 5 years ago when I was just starting out as a rookie ranger for the state of West Virginia. Fresh out of training, eager to make my mark, convinced I understood the wilderness. I was 26, with a degree in environmental science and a lifetime of camping trips that I mistakenly believed had prepared me for anything the Appalachian wilderness could throw at me. My supervisor, Jim Harkinza, weathered man with 30 years of experience, etched into the lines of his face, had tried to temper my enthusiasm with caution. "The mountains have secrets, kid," he told me during my first week. "Things that don't make it into the training manuals. You respect that and you'll be fine." I nodded and smiled, dismissing his words as the typical old-timer trying to spook the newcomer. If only I'd listened. My assigned patrol area was the northeastern section of Monongahela National Forest, a sprawling wilderness of dense woodlands, rugged terrain, and hidden valleys. I'd spend my days hiking the trails, checking campgrounds, and ensuring visitors followed regulations. Most days were uneventful, picking up litter, giving directions to lost hikers, occasionally dealing with a campfire that hadn't been properly extinguished. The day it happened began like any other. Early April, the forest caught in that in-between stage where winter reluctantly loosens its grip while spring struggles to take hold. The morning air carried a biting chill, but the forecast promised temperatures in the mid-60s by afternoon, perfect hiking weather. I reported to the ranger station at 7 a.m., checked the logs from the night shift, and loaded my backpack with the usual supplies: first aid kit, radio, GPS, binoculars, water, food, and the other tools of the trade. Jim was off that day, so I checked in with Ranger Davies, who barely looked up from his computer when I announced my patrol route. "Stick to the schedule," was all he said. "We've got school groups coming through the main trails later." I nodded, though I already had other plans. There was a section of backcountry trail I'd been meaning to explore, an area marked on our maps but rarely visited by tourists. It wasn't technically off-limits for solo patrols, but it wasn't encouraged either. Still, I was feeling restless, eager to see more than the same well-worn paths. The first few hours passed uneventfully. I checked in by radio at the scheduled times, inspected a couple of backcountry campsites, both unoccupied, and documented some trail erosion that would need attention. By noon, I'd reached the junction where I needed to make a decision: continue on the standard patrol route or veer onto the lesser-traveled path I'd been eyeing. I stood at the trail marker, staring down the narrow, overgrown path that disappeared into the thick forest. Something about it called to me, a pull I couldn't explain. I glanced at my watch, did some quick mental calculations, and decided I could explore for a couple of hours and still make it back to the ranger station by the end of my shift. The trail was more challenging than I'd anticipated. Fallen trees blocked the path in several places, forcing me to climb over or find a way around. The forest grew denser, the canopy overhead blocking much of the sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight on the forest floor. I carefully marked my path on my GPS, making notes of landmarks. The last thing I needed was to get lost on my unauthorized detour. Around 2 p.m., I stopped for lunch beside a small stream, sitting on a moss-covered boulder as I ate my sandwich. The forest was quiet too, quiet, I realized. No birdsong, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush, just the gentle gurgle of the stream and my own breathing. That should have been my first warning. In all my training, in all the wilderness guides I'd studied, one consistent warning stood out. When the forest goes silent, something is wrong. Predators are near. Danger is present. But I dismissed it, attributing the silence to my own presence disturbing the wildlife. It was as I was packing up to continue that I first heard a sound that stopped me cold. A scream, distant but distinct, echoing through the trees. Not quite human, not quite animal, but somewhere horrifyingly in between. I had been running the trails by myself this day, and heard something that sounded like screaming coming from up ahead. Being the good little ranger that I am, I decided to investigate things. As I got closer, the sound intensified. But there were no words being spoken, almost as if whatever was making the noise was trying to draw me closer. I hesitated, my hand moving to the radio at my belt. protocol said I should report unusual sounds or signs of distress. But what would I say? That I heard a weird scream while exploring an area I wasn't supposed to be in? Besides, it was probably just a fox or a bobcat. Mountain lions were rare in these parts, but not unheard of, and they could make sounds unnervingly similar to human screams. I decided to investigate first, report later if necessary. Following the sound, I moved deeper into the forest, away from the trail. The terrain grew steeper, rockier. I had to use my hands in places, half climbing as the ground rose sharply. The screaming continued, intermittent now, but growing louder. It sounded distressed, pained, and despite my misgivings, I couldn't ignore what might be an animal or person in trouble. The light was starting to fade when I reached the edge of a small clearing, bordered on one side by a rocky cliff face about 30 feet high. And there, at the base of the cliff, was a sight that would forever change my understanding of the world. So I'm following this screaming because it kind of sounds like a mountain lion, but it sounds very humanistic, like somebody had genuinely needed help. So after following it for a short while, I come to this small cliff section where I am seeing a mountain lion. Actually, the source of this noise is going absolutely crazy right next to its den. I crouched behind a fallen tree, observing from about 60 feet away. The mountain liona, large female, tawny coat dulled by the fading light, was pacing frantically before what appeared to be a cave entrance at the base of the cliff. Her movements were erratic, panicked. She would approach the entrance, then back away suddenly, tail lashing, before letting out another of those bone-chilling screams that had drawn me here. I'm watching this in awe, because this mountain lion is clearly distressed about something, and she's going crazy, screaming and making all sorts of noise. Remember, I was a real bad rookie at this point. I didn't know much about animals, and this was really my first run-in with even mountain lions screaming. Which, by the way, if you've never heard, you can Google. It does sound a lot like a human screaming. Anyway, I remained perfectly still, barely breathing. My training had covered mountain lion encounters, but always with the emphasis on avoiding them in the first place. They were solitary creatures, not typically aggressive toward humans unless provoked or protecting young. This one, however, seemed focused entirely on something inside that cave. In my years since, I've seen all manner of wildlife behavior, territorial disputes, mating rituals, hunting tactics, but nothing like what I witnessed next. This mountain lion began screaming and yelling, or making the roaring sounds like it was screaming, and then slowly started backing away from the den entrance. And you could start to hear the heavy sounds of something big coming out towards the den. Instinctually, I was thinking, let me guess. A bear had somehow taken residence or curiosity in this mountain lion's den, and now the two were fighting. But before that thought could even finish going all the way through my brain, the sound from within the cave grew louder, a shuffling, dragging sound accompanied by deep, guttural breathing. Something large was moving toward the entrance. My first thought was a bear, as black bears were common in these mountains. A confrontation between a mountain lion and a bear would be rare, potentially deadly for both animals, but not beyond the realm of possibility. I reached slowly for my pack, where my camera was stored. Whatever was about to emerge, it would be valuable to document it. My fingers had just closed around the camera when the creature appeared. This hulking, hairy figure steps out into the entrance of the den, reaches down in one motion, picks up the mountain lion. The mountain lion fights back, but this thing is not even fazed. It grabs the mountain lion's head, twists it like it's nothing, completely breaking the neck, and then throwing the body very hard up against a massive fir tree nearby. And you can hear its spine crack from the 60 feet away that I was watching this thing. Time seemed to freeze. My breath caught in my throat, my heart hammering against my ribs so violently I feared it might give away my position. The creature, for I had no other word to describe it, stood at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark, matted fur. Its proportions were humanoid, but wrong somehow. Arms too long, shoulders too broad, head set directly on those massive shoulders with barely any neck visible. In the fading light, I couldn't make out details of its face, and for that small mercy, I remained grateful. What I could see was enough to haunt my nightmares for years to come. The raw, primal strength it had displayed in dispatching a 130-pound apex predator, as if it were nothing more than a troublesome insect, told me everything I needed to know about my chances should it discover my presence. And then the body slumped down. This thing, staring at the body, let out a frustrated grunt and flared its nostrils, kind of all huffy and puffy, and then walked back into the den. My jaw was literally on the ground and I was pale. I had never been so scared in my life. I picked up my jaw and I ran as fast as I could. I ran. No thought, no plan, just blind animal panic driving me through the darkening forest. Branches whipped my face, roots threatened to trip me with every step, but I didn't slow down. I couldn't. The image of that creature, the sound of the mountain lion's spine shattering against the tree, played on repeat in my mind. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning. At some point I stumbled, went down hard on one knee, and the sharp pain finally broke through my panic. I stopped, gasping for breath, and realized I had no idea where I was. In my blind flight, I'd lost all sense of direction. Night had fallen completely now, the forest around me pitch black except for the faint moonlight filtering through the canopy. With shaking hands, I pulled out my flashlight and GPS. The screen showed me far off any marked trail, but at least I had a general idea of which direction to head to reach the nearest road. I listened intently for any sound of pursuit, but heard nothing beyond my own ragged breathing and the resumed chorus of night insects a small comfort, as their song suggested no large predator was nearby. I moved as quickly and quietly as I could through the darkness, checking the GPS frequently to maintain my course. Every shadow seemed to shift and move, every sound amplified by my fear. I kept imagining hot breath on the back of my neck, massive hands reaching for me from the darkness. After what felt like hours, I spotted the welcome gleam of metal through the tree's meat truck, parked where I'd left it at the trailhead. I broke into a final sprint, fumbling with my keys as I reached the vehicle, and practically threw myself inside, locking the doors immediately. And when I got back to my truck, I didn't know exactly who to call or what to say. I had never seen anything like this before, and even to this day I speculate what it was that even was. What did I see and what did I stumble upon? I felt like my heart was about to beat out of its chest. Sitting there in the dark, engine running, heater blasting to combat the chill that seemed to have settled into my very bones, I tried to process what I'd witnessed. My ranger training had covered wildlife encounters of all kinds: bears, cougars, wolves, even moose, but nothing like this. Nothing that could explain a bipedal, 8-foot-tall creature with the strength to kill a mountain lion with its bare hands. The rational part of my mind scrambled for explanations. A bear standing on its hind legs? No, the proportions were all wrong, and no bear moved like that. A man in some kind of costume? Ridiculous, no human could have managed that feat of strength. And why would anyone be out here in such a remote area, in such a convincing disguise? Which left me with explanations I wasn't prepared to accept. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the wild man. Stories I'd dismissed as campfire tales and local legends. I reached for my radio, then hesitated, hand hovering over the call button. What would I say? Who would believe me? I'd be laughed out of the ranger service, possibly subjected to drug testing or psychological evaluation. And all this after I'd violated protocol by going off on my own unauthorized exploration. I put the radio down. I needed time to think, to process, to decide what, if anything, I was going to tell my superiors. I put the truck in gear and drove slowly back toward the ranger station, my mind racing faster than the vehicle ever could. I will say this, though, that out of all the years I've done this, that was the only thing that sticks out to me as completely out of the ordinary. Because after this, I've never actually told another soul about this. You're the first one, congratulations. I was too scared and always have been too scared to tell any of my fellow rangers or even my bosses. I didn't want to lose my job or get called crazy or made fun of. But perhaps these sorts of things are much more common than I realize. The next morning, I reported to work as usual. I'd spent a restless night in my small cabin, jumping at every sound, checking and rechecking that the doors and windows were locked. When I finally did sleep, my dreams were filled with dark shapes and screaming cougars. Jim was back on duty, nursing a cup of coffee at his desk when I walked in. He looked up, his weathered face creasing into a frown as he took in my appearance. "Jesus, kid, you look like hell." I managed a weak smile. "Rough night. Didn't sleep well." He studied me for a moment longer. "Anything I should know about?" This was my chance. I could tell him everything, unburden myself of this terrible knowledge, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I shook my head. "Just some bad dreams, I'm fine." Jim didn't look convinced, but he didn't press the issue. Well, you're on visitor center duty today. Try not to scare the tourists with that zombie look. The day passed in a blur. I went through the motions answering questions, handing out maps, explaining trail conditions all while feeling utterly disconnected from the normal world around me. How could everything just continue as if nothing had happened, as if the foundations of reality hadn't shifted beneath my feet? During my lunch break, I found myself in front of the ranger station's small library, a collection of field guides, local history books, and wildlife management resources. Glancing around to make sure no one was watching, I pulled out a book I'd always ignored before, Appalachian Folklore and Legends. I flipped through it quickly, stopping at a chapter titled The Wild Man of the Mountains. The description was vague, large, hairy, human-like creature supposedly inhabiting the remote regions of the Appalachian Range. Sightings dated back to indigenous accounts, continued through early European settlement, and persisted into the modern era. Most were dismissed as misidentified bears, overactive imaginations, or outright hoaxes. But one account, from a hunter in 1923, caught my attention. The creature moved with terrible purpose, not the shambling gait of a bear on hind legs, but the deliberate stride of something that belonged on 2 feet. It took my deer, a full-grown buck I'd just shot, and snapped its neck with one quick twist, as easily as I might wring a dishcloth. I closed the book quickly as I heard footsteps approaching, shoving it back onto the shelf just as Davies walked in. "Planning a camping trip?" he asked, nodding toward the book section. "Just brushing up on local knowledge," I replied, trying to keep my voice casual. Never know what the tourists might ask about. The next few weeks were the hardest. I performed my duties mechanically, avoiding assignments that would take me back to that remote section of forest. When asked, I made excuses. The trails there needed maintenance. There were better areas to monitor for the season, anything to avoid returning to the scene of my encounter. At night, I researched obsessively. I ordered books on cryptozoology, Bigfoot sightings, unexplained phenomena. I created a password-protected folder on my laptop where I compiled every account I could find that resembled what I'd seen. I studied maps of the area, marking caves and remote locations where such a creature might live undetected. I also began to notice things I'd overlooked before, the way certain experienced rangers avoided specific areas of the forest, the knowing looks they exchanged when tourists asked about strange sounds or local legends, the unspoken boundaries that seemed to exist, areas that were technically part of our jurisdiction but rarely, if ever, patrolled. One evening, about a month after my encounter, I was having a beer with Jim and a few other rangers at the local bar when the conversation turned to strange experiences in the field. "Ever see anything you couldn't explain out there?" asked Rodriguez, a ranger who'd transferred from Yellowstone the previous year. There were the usual stories, weird lights that turned out to be poachers, unexplained sounds attributed to weather phenomena, the occasional marijuana growing operation discovered in remote locations. But then Jim, after his 4th beer, grew serious. "There are things in those mountains that don't make it into the reports," he said quietly. "Things we don't talk about because nobody would believe us anyway." The table fell silent. I felt my heart rate quicken. "Like what?" I finally asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Jim looked at me, his eyes slightly unfocused from the alcohol but still penetrating. "Like the reason we don't patrol the northeastern ridge after sunset. Like why we always go in pairs to the Blackwater Caves. Like why every few years we find abandoned camping gear, high-end stuff nobody would just leave behind with no sign of the owners." Rodriguez laughed nervously. "Come on, man. You're just trying to spook us." Jim shrugged, draining his beer. "Believe what you want. But there's a reason the old-timers have rules that don't make it into the handbooks." The conversation moved on, but I couldn't shake Jim's words. Was it possible he knew? That other rangers had seen what I'd seen, but, like me, kept their experiences to themselves out of fear of ridicule or worse. 2 months after my encounter, I was finally beginning to regain some semblance of normalcy. The nightmares had become less frequent, my appetite had returned, and I'd stopped jumping at every unexpected sound. I still avoided that section of forest, but I'd managed to convince myself that what I'd seen was a 1-in-a-million occurrence, unlikely to ever happen again. Then came the news that would shatter my fragile peace. A hiker had gone missing, a solo backpacker who'd set out for a week-long trek through the northeastern section of the forest. 3 days into his planned route, He'd missed his scheduled check-in with his girlfriend. By day 5, with no word and no response to emergency pings on his satellite phone, she'd reported him missing. As rangers, we were all called in for the search and rescue operation. Maps were spread out, teams assigned, search grids established. I stared at the map, my blood running cold as I realized his planned route would have taken him within 2 miles of the cave where I'd witnessed the creature. "Davis, you'll take grid section E7 with Harkins," the search coordinator announced, pointing to an area that included that very location. I felt the blood drain from my face. I'm more familiar with the western trails," I stammered. "Maybe I should." "You've logged plenty of hours in the northeast section." The coordinator cut me off. "And we need experienced people in the more remote areas. You're with Harkins, section E7. I looked to Jim, hoping for a reprieve, but he just nodded, his expression unreadable. As we geared up for the search, I debated whether to tell Jim what I knew, what I'd seen. This wasn't just about my reputation anymore. A man's life could be at stake. But would telling him help? Or would it just waste valuable time as I tried to convince him of something that sounded impossible? "You okay, kid?" Jim asked as we loaded our packs into his truck. "You look like you're about to puke." I took a deep breath. "Jim, there's something you should know about that area." He paused, hand on the truck door, and gave me a long look. "I'm listening. Maybe I should learn to be a little more open-minded in sharing my experiences. Even so, in this field of work, I just feel so apprehensive about the whole thing. I wanted to know if you had any guesses of what it is that happened." The drive to our search area was tense. After I'd told Jim everything, the unauthorized exploration, the mountain lion, the creature, my months of secret research, he'd fallen into a heavy silence. He didn't laugh or dismiss my story, which was somehow more unnerving than if he had. "You should have told me sooner," was all he said as we neared the trailhead that would lead us to our assigned search grid. "You believe me?" I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. Jim parked the truck and turned to face me, his expression grave. "Let's just say you're not the first ranger to see something that doesn't fit into our understanding of these mountains." A chill ran through me. "You've seen it too?" He shook his head. "Not personally, but I've been doing this job for 30 years. I've heard stories, found evidence I couldn't explain. Lost good people." He reached into the back seat and pulled out a rifle I hadn't noticed before. Not the standard issue we sometimes carried for protection against aggressive wildlife, but something heavier, more powerful. "This isn't standard search and rescue equipment," I noted, my mouth suddenly dry. "No, it's not." Jim checked the chamber, then loaded the rifle with practiced efficiency. "We'll follow protocol, search our grid, call out for the missing hiker. But we stay together, we get out before dark, and if we see anything that doesn't look right, we leave immediately. Understood?" I nodded, a mixture of validation and fresh fear coursing through me. Jim believed me, which meant the creature was real, but that same reality now meant we were deliberately walking into its territory. The search began methodically. We called the missing hiker's name every few hundred yards, checked for signs of passage, documented our progress on our GPS units. The forest felt different this time, perhaps because I wasn't alone, perhaps because I now knew what might be watching from the shadows. As we moved deeper into our assigned grid, I began to recognize landmarks from my ill-fated solo expedition. That distinctive split tree, the unusual rock formation, the small stream cutting through the forest floor. We were getting close to the cave. "Jim," I said quietly, pointing ahead. "The cliff face is just beyond that rise. The cave is at the base." He nodded, adjusting his grip on the rifle. "We'll approach slowly. Keep calling for the hiker. If he's injured or lost, he needs to know help is coming. And if something else hears us..." Jim's jaw tightened. "Then at least we won't be taken by surprise." We continued forward, our calls for the missing hiker seeming to be swallowed by the increasingly dense forest. The afternoon light was fading faster than it should have, the canopy overhead thickening until it felt like twilight despite being only mid-afternoon. And then, just as we crested the small rise that would give us a view of the cliff face, Jim froze, raising his hand in the universal signal to stop. I halted beside him, straining to hear what had caught his attention. Theria sound like branches breaking, but too rhythmic, too deliberate. Something large was moving through the forest ahead of us, moving away from our position. Jim raised the rifle, sighting along the barrel, but there was nothing visible through the dense undergrowth. After a moment, the sounds faded, leaving only the unnatural silence I remembered all too well from my first visit to this place. "What do you think?" I whispered. "Could be a bear," Jim replied, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. "Let's keep moving, but stay alert." We approached the cliff face cautiously, the cave entrance now visible below. There was no sign of the mountain lion carcass I'd seen months ago. Scavengers would have long since picked it clean, the bones scattered or carried off. The cave mouth yawned, dark and foreboding, a black void against the gray stone of the cliff. No sounds emerged from its depths, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, evaluating, waiting. Jim approached first, rifle at the ready, while I scanned the surrounding forest for any movement. The entrance was larger than I remembered, easily 10 feet high and almost as wide, the ground before it packed hard and smooth from years, perhaps centuries of use. "Hello?" Jim called into the darkness. "Ranger service. Anyone in there?" His voice echoed briefly, then was absorbed by the darkness. No response. Jim pulled a powerful flashlight from his pack and shone it into the cave. The beam penetrated perhaps 30 feet before the darkness swallowed it, revealing a passage that seemed to curve slightly to the right before disappearing deeper into the earth. "We need to check inside," Jim said grimly. "The hiker could be in there, injured." I knew he was right, but every instinct screamed against entering that darkness. "If the creature lives there, then it's not home right now," Jim finished. "We heard it moving away from here. This might be our only chance to search safely." Reluctantly, I nodded, pulling out my own flashlight. Together, we stepped into the mouth of the cave, the temperature dropping noticeably as we left the filtered sunlight behind. The cave floor was surprisingly even, descending gradually as the passage curved. Our flashlight beams revealed scrape marks on the walls about 7 feet up, as if something tall had brushed against the stone repeatedly over time. The air smelled of damp earth and something else, something musky and rank that made my nose wrinkle. About 50 feet in, the passage widened into a larger chamber. Our lights played across the space, revealing what could only be described as a living area. A depression in the floor lined with dried grass and leaves formed a crude bed. Scattered around the chamber were objects that stopped us in our tracks: a torn backpack, a dented metal water bottle, the remains of a hiking boot. "Jesus," Jim breathed, moving closer to examine the items. "Some of this looks recent." I forced myself to approach, shining my light on the backpack. The fabric was weathered but not ancient, the design modern. Jim carefully opened it, revealing energy bar wrappers, a broken compass, and a waterproof wallet. He opened the wallet with gloved hands, extracting a driver's license. "Michael Thurman," he read, then looked up at me with grim eyes. "Reported missing last hunting season, 5 months ago." I swallowed hard, my flashlight beam tracking across the rest of the chamber. Against one wall lay a pile of bones, some clearly animal, others disturbingly long and straight. My light caught something partially buried in the packed earth floor, a glint of metal. Moving closer, I crouched down for a better look. It was a watch, the face cracked but the metal band still intact. Beside it, partially exposed, was what appeared to be a human finger bone. "Jim," I called, my voice tight. "I think I found." A sound from deeper in the cave cut me off, a shuffling, dragging sound I recognized immediately. The same sound I'd heard before the creature emerged to kill the mountain lion. Jim was beside me in an instant, rifle raised. "We need to go. Now." We backed toward the entrance, flashlights trained on the dark passage that led deeper into the cave. The shuffling grew louder, accompanied by that same deep, guttural breathing I remembered from my first encounter. "Run," Jim hissed, and we turned, abandoning stealth for speed as we raced back up the passage toward daylight. Behind us, a roar erupted, part animal fury, part human rage, the sound so powerful it seemed to shake the very walls of the cave. The creature had discovered our intrusion, and it was coming. We burst from the cave entrance, the fading afternoon light momentarily blinding after the darkness within. Without pausing, we sprinted for the tree line, seeking the cover of the forest. Jim moved with surprising speed for his age, the rifle clutched firmly in his hands as he led the way back toward the trail. The roar came again, closer now, and I risked a glance back over my shoulder. The creature stood framed in the cave entrance, its massive silhouette blotting out the light behind it. Even at this distance, I could see it scenting the air, turning its head in our direction. Then it began to move, dropping to all fours like a gorilla, covering ground with terrifying speed. "It's coming," I gasped, redoubling my pace. Jim didn't look back, just angled slightly to the left, away from the direct path back to the trail. "We can't outrun it," he panted. "Need to find a place to make a stand." The logic was sound but horrifying. This thing had killed a mountain lion with its bare hands. What chance did we have, even with Jim's rifle? We crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, branches breaking, undergrowth being flattened by a massive body moving at speed. Ahead, the ground began to rise sharply. Jim headed straight for what appeared to be a rock fall, a jumble of boulders creating a natural barrier about 15 feet high. "There," he called. "We can climb up, get the high ground." We reached the rocks and began to climb, the rough stone cutting into my hands as I hauled myself upward. Jim scrambled up beside me, more agile than his age would suggest. We reached the top just as the creature burst from the forest below. In the clear afternoon light, I got my first good look at what had haunted my nightmares for months. It stood upright now, at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark brown fur that hung in matted clumps. Its body was powerfully muscled, the shoulders impossibly broad, arms hanging almost to its knees. The face god. The face was a nightmarish blend of ape and human features, with a heavy brow ridge shadowing deep-set eyes that gleamed with unmistakable intelligence and rage. Jim raised the rifle, taking careful aim. "I don't want to do this," he muttered almost to himself. "It might be the last of its kind." The creature roared again, beating its massive chest with fists the size of dinner plates. Then it charged the rockfall, covering the distance in seconds, and began to climb. Jim fired. The shot echoed through the forest, and the creature jerked as the bullet found its mark in the shoulder. It howled a sound of pain and fury that raised the hair on the back of my neck but didn't slow its ascent. Jim chambered another round, fired again. This shot caught the creature in the upper chest. It faltered, clinging to the rocks with one massive hand, dark blood matting the fur where the bullets had struck. For a moment, our eyes met the creature's and mine. In that gaze, I saw not just animal rage but something else, intelligence, awareness, a depth of being I hadn't expected. It knew what we were. It understood the weapon Jim held, and it hated us with a profound, ancient hatred that transcended mere territorial aggression. Then Jim fired a third time, and the creature fell backward, tumbling down the rockfall to land in a heap at the base. It lay still, and for a moment I thought it was over. Then, incredibly, it began to move again, pushing itself up on one arm, dark blood now pouring from multiple wounds. It looked up at us once more, and made a sound I'll never forget, not a roar this time, but something almost like speech, guttural and halting but patterned, purposeful. Jim's face had gone pale. He raised the rifle one last time, aimed carefully, and fired. The creature's head snapped back, and this time when it fell, it didn't move again. The silence that followed was absolute. No birds, no insects, as if the entire forest held its breath. "Is it?" I couldn't finish the question. Jim lowered the rifle slowly. "Yes." His voice was hollow, his face etched with something that looked like grief. "God help me, I think it is. Was this really a Bigfoot's den? Or was this thing invading the mountain lion's den? Because you need to know that seeing this thing kill a mountain lion in front of me with such ease, twisting its neck like it was crumpling up a piece of paper so effortlessly, and then shucking its body as hard as it could against the base of a fir tree, breaking its spine and seeing it just slump and die there. You don't just see anything that makes a mountain lion look like that. We're talking about an animal of considerable force and size, something I myself would run far, far away from. Whatever that creature is, Bigfoot or not, I want nothing to do with it." We stood on that rocky outcrop for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, staring down at the motionless form below. Neither of us seemed eager to approach, to confirm what we'd done. Finally, Jim sighed deeply. "We need to call this in." I turned to him, incredulous. "Call it in? And say what exactly? That we just shot and killed a Bigfoot?" Jim rubbed his weathered face with one hand, suddenly looking every year of his age and then some. "No. We say we found evidence relating to the missing hiker, which is true. We say we were attacked by an animal, also true." He looked at me steadily. We don't mention size, appearance, or anything else that sounds unbelievable. But Jim, this could be the scientific discovery of the century. A new species, a missing link, something completely unknown to science. You think they'll let it be a scientific discovery? Jim's voice was bitter. This forest would be overrun with trophy hunters, media, government agents. Every crackpot with a rifle would be out here trying to bag their own specimen. And if there are more of them, he shook his head. They've survived this long by staying hidden. Maybe that's how it should remain. I wanted to argue, but deep down I knew he was right. I'd spent months researching cryptid sightings, the aftermath of supposed Bigfoot evidence. Most was debunked, ridiculed. The few researchers who maintained their claims were ostracized from the scientific community. Their careers effectively ended. And Jim was right about something else. Tooth Forest would be destroyed in the ensuing circus. Any other creatures like this one would be hunted to extinction. So what do we do? I asked. Jim checked his watch. We're overdue for a check-in. I'll radio in, report that we found evidence of the missing hiker in a cave, and that we were attacked by a large predator, possibly a bear. I was forced to shoot it. We'll request a recovery team. And when they get here and see that, I nodded toward the creature's body. It won't be here. Jim's expression was grim but determined. We have about 2 hours until a team could reach this location. We need to move fast. What followed was the most surreal experience of my life. We descended the rockfall cautiously, Jim's rifle still at the ready in case the creature was somehow still alive. It wasn't. Up close, it was even more imposing. The hands alone were twice the size of mine, the muscular arms thicker than my thighs. Jim directed me to gather firewood while he used his hunting knife to collect sample stuffs of hair, scraps of skin, and, after a moment's hesitation, a single tooth that had been dislodged by his final shot. These he carefully wrapped and stowed in his pack. Evidence, he said simply when he saw my questioning look. Just in case someday the world is ready. We built a pyre around the creature's body, using dead fallen branches soaked in the emergency fuel Jim carried for winter rescues. As the flames took hold, we stood in silence, watching smoke rise through the canopy above. I've been a ranger for 30 years, Jim said quietly. Seen things most people wouldn't believe. Mountain lions taking down elk, bears fishing salmon from rivers, birth and death and everything in between. He paused, his eyes reflecting the flames. But I never thought I'd see this, never thought I'd have to make this kind of decision. I understood his conflict. We were destroying evidence of something extraordinary, something that could rewrite our understanding of the natural world. But we were also protecting the forest we'd sworn to serve, and possibly protecting other creatures like this one that might still roam its depths. We waited until the fire had done its work, then scattered the ashes and charred remains as best we could. By the time we finished, darkness was falling, and we needed to make our way back to meet the incoming search team. Jim radioed in our location, reporting that we'd found signs of the missing hiker in a cave, including his backpack and wallet. He explained that we'd been attacked by a large animal, which he'd been forced to shoot, but that in the ensuing confusion, we'd been separated from the remains. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't entirely a lie either. The recovery team met us about a mile from the cave. They were primarily focused on the evidence of the missing hiker, accepting Jim's account of the animal attack without much questioning. His reputation and 30 years of service gave his words weight that my story alone would never have carried. In the days that followed, a more thorough search was conducted. The cave yielded more evidence not just of the hiker we'd been searching for, but of at least 3 other missing persons cases dating back several years. The official report attributed the deaths to predator activity, likely bear, though the forensic evidence was inconclusive. The case was closed. The families received closure, if not comfort. The forest continued to be protected and preserved. And if certain areas were now marked as environmentally sensitive and restricted from public access, few questioned it. Jim retired 3 months later. Before he left, he called me into his office and handed me a small metal box with a key. Safety deposit box, he explained. First National Bank in town. The samples are inside, along with my detailed report of what really happened. Your name's on the account, too. He held my gaze steadily. Someday, when the time is right, when people might actually believe it without destroying everything trying to prove it, you'll know what to do with it. I've carried that key for 5 years now. I've continued my work as a ranger, watching over the forest with new eyes, a new understanding of the secrets it holds. I've heard the stories from other parks, other wilderness-era sightings, encounters, evidence that doesn't quite fit the known catalog of North American wildlife. I've never seen another creature like the one Jim and I encountered that day. Perhaps it was the last of its kind. Perhaps the others, if they exist, have learned to be more cautious around humans. Or perhaps they've simply retreated deeper into the remaining wild places, areas where even rangers rarely venture. What I do know is that the wilderness is vaster and more mysterious than most people realize. Our understanding of its scientific, rational catalog is still just a thin veneer over depths we've barely begun to explore. So I continue my patrols. I warn hikers to stay on marked trails, to make noise while hiking, to properly store their food. All the standard precautions against bears and other known predators. And if I sometimes add a few extra warnings, if I discourage solo hiking in certain areas, if I make sure every visitor understands that the forest demands respect, well, that's just me being a thorough ranger. Because now I know what Jim meant when he told me, all those years ago, that the mountains have secrets, things that don't make it into the training manuals, things that perhaps shouldn't. And you anonymous readers on the internet, Terry, now the only others who know the full truth of what I experienced. I've never told another soul in person. Not my colleagues, not my friends, certainly not my superiors. As I said at the beginning, I was too scared of losing my job, of being called crazy or worse. But maybe, by sharing this story, I'm finally taking the first step toward the day when Jim's samples can emerge from that safety deposit box. When the world might be ready to accept that our understanding of nature is still incomplete, that there are creatures yet undiscovered, even in our own backyards. Until then, if you find yourself hiking in the mountains of West Virginia or any wilderness, really stay alert, make noise, keep to the trails. And if the forest around you suddenly goes quiet, if you hear something that sounds like a human scream but not quite, don't investigate. Turn around, go back the way you came, return to safety. Because some mysteries are best left unsolved, some creatures best left undisturbed, and some stories perhaps best left untold. I've always known these woods were alive, not just in the way most people understand with trees and animals and the natural cycles of life, but alive in ways that defy explanation. My grandfather, who gave me my Cherokee name, Adahi, meaning one who lives in the woods, understood this better than anyone. For 12 years, I've served as a ranger at Salagi National Forest, a sprawling wilderness in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The forest's official name on government maps is different, but our people have called it Salagi since before the white man's boots first disturbed these grounds. It's a place where mist clings to ancient pines until midday, and where shadows seem to move of their own accord. The radio crackled to life on my belt. Ranger Stevens, come in. The formal name James Stevens always felt foreign to me. I am Adahi to my family, to the elders, to myself. Stevens here, I replied, pressing the talk button with my thumb as I navigated a steep section of the trail. Morning dew still clung to the undergrowth, dampening my boots. We've got another missing persons report. Family of 4 this time. They were supposed to check in at Whitewater Campground last night. Never showed. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. Any last known coordinates? They were hiking the Ridge Trail yesterday afternoon, planned to camp at the Overlook. Weather was clear and they're experienced hikers. The Ridge Trail, again. The 3rd disappearance in that area this season. The first had been a solo hiker, a college student who'd gone off trail to photograph wildlife. They found his backpack 2 weeks later, camera intact, with strange blurry photos of something large moving between distant trees. The second was an older couple who'd been coming to these mountains for 30 years without incident. I'll head that way now, I said. Any search parties organized yet? County rescue is assembling, ETA 90 minutes. You're closest. Copy that, I'll check in when I reach the ridge. As I changed direction toward the Ridge Trail, my mind wandered to the stories my grandfather told around the fire when I was a child. Stories of Nunyunuwith Stoneman who stalked these forests, and of Kekle Kudla, the legendary hairy man of the mountains. Tourists and park officials dismissed these as quaint native folklore, but my grandfather's eyes always held something deeper when he spoke of Thema warning. The ridge trail was beautiful but treacherous. It followed an ancient pathway that my ancestors had used for centuries, winding along a granite ridge that offered spectacular views of the valley below. But it was remote, with steep drop-offs and dense forest on either side that could swallow a person whole if they strayed from the path. As I hiked, the forest grew unnaturally quiet. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, just the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of my boots on the trail. Rangers develop a sixth sense for their territory, and something was off. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I found myself checking my sidearm more often than usual. I reached the designated overlook campsite by mid-morning. The family's tent was still there, zipped closed. Their cooking gear was arranged neatly beside a fire pit containing cold ashes. 4 backpacks leaned against a log. "Hello," I called out. "Park ranger, anyone here?" Nothing but the wind in the pines answered me. I approached the tent and called out again before unzipping it. Empty sleeping bags were arranged inside, alongside personal items. Everything appeared normal, except for the complete absence of people. Moving methodically, I examined the campsite. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no indication of animal intrusion. It was as if the family had simply vanished into thin air. The only unusual detail was a series of large, indistinct footprints at the edge of the clearing, leading into the dense forest, too large for a human, too shaped for a bear. I photographed them carefully before they could be disturbed, then followed them to the tree line. The forest beyond was old growth, untouched for centuries. Grandfather called it the sacred place and warned me never to enter it alone. The radio crackled again. "Stevens, what's your status?" "I'm at the campsite. Family's gear is all here, but no sign of them. I've found some unusual tracks heading east into the old growth section." Static hissed before the reply came. "Wait for backup. County rescue is en route." "Copy that," I said. But my eyes remained fixed on those massive humanoid footprints disappearing into the shadows. I've been a ranger long enough to follow protocol, but I've been Cherokee long enough to know when something unnatural is happening in our ancestral lands. I checked my watch still 45 minutes before backup would arrive. I couldn't shake the feeling that this family might not have that long to wait. The wind shifted, carrying a strange, musky odor from the direction of the tracks. An odor I couldn't identify, not bear, not deer, not any animal I recognized from my years in these woods. Making my decision, I updated my coordinates in my GPS locator, checked my gear, and stepped off the trail. Protocol be damned, there were children missing. The old-growth forest swallowed me immediately. The canopy above was so dense that it created a perpetual twilight below. Moss-covered trunks wider than my truck stood like ancient sentinels. The tracks were clearer here in the soft earth-huge, 5-toed imprints pressing deep into the ground. Whatever made them was heavy and walked on 2 legs. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory. "The old ones still walk in the deepest woods. They were here before us and will remain when we are gone." 20 minutes into my tracking, I found the first sign of the missing family, a child's stuffed animal dropped beside a massive fallen tree. There was no blood, no sign of violence. Just the abandoned toy lying there like a breadcrumb on a trail. The forest grew denser, darker, and I had to use my flashlight despite the morning hour. The tracks continued, now joined by smaller human footprints, the family, seemingly walking alongside the creature. Not running, not dragged, just walking. That's when I heard a low, rumbling sound that was neither growl nor speech, but something in between. It echoed through the trees, making it impossible to pinpoint the direction. My hand moved to my sidearm instinctively. From somewhere ahead came a child's laugh, quickly silenced. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the vastness of the ancient forest. "Park ranger, I'm here to help." Silence fell again, heavier than before. Then, a rustling of movement, something massive shifting through the undergrowth ahead. I raised my flashlight, and for an instant, in the narrow beam, I caught a glimpse of something tall and broad-shouldered moving between the trees. Something covered in dark hair that walked upright on 2 legs. In that moment, I knew my grandfather's stories weren't just legends. The old ones were real, and they had taken a family into the deepest part of our woods. The beam of my flashlight cut through the gloom, briefly illuminating the massive silhouette before it disappeared behind a stand of ancient hemlocks. My heart hammered against my ribs as I forced myself to move forward. 12 years as a ranger had taught me to respect these mountains and their dangers: bears, cougars, sudden storms that could strand the unprepared, but nothing in my training had prepared me for this. "This is Ranger Stevens," I whispered into my radio, keeping my voice low. "I'm approximately 2 miles east of the Ridge Trail overlook, tracking possible survivors and something else." Static answered me. I tried again, adjusting the frequency. Nothing. The old-growth forest had swallowed all signals. I was alone with whatever stalked these woods. The tracks continued deeper into a ravine where a small creek cut through the forest floor. The water ran clear over smooth stones, and beside it I found another sign of the missing family: a man's boot print in the mud, alongside those larger, inhuman prints. They had stopped here, perhaps for water. A branch snapped somewhere ahead, and I froze, listening intently. The forest had gone silent again. No birds, no insects, as if every living thing was holding its breath. In the stillness, I could hear my own pulse throbbing in my ears. Moving as quietly as possible, I continued following the tracks. The ravine narrowed, the sides steepening until I was making my way through what amounted to a natural corridor of stone and earth. The tactical part of my brain screamed that I was walking into a natural trap, but the tracks led onward, and with them, my only hope of finding the missing family. The temperature dropped noticeably as I progressed. The summer heat that had made the higher trails uncomfortable couldn't penetrate this deep into the earth. My breath began to fog in front of my face, and I pulled my jacket closer around me. The narrow passage suddenly opened into a small clearing dominated by an enormous tulip poplar, the largest I'd ever seen. Its trunk must have been 12 feet in diameter, its lowest branches starting 50 feet up. At its base, nestled between massive roots, was what appeared to be an opening, a dark void leading beneath the tree. And surrounding that opening were dozens of items: a hiker's boot, a tattered backpack, a camera, a child's jacket, objects I recognized from missing persons reports over the years. This wasn't just about one family. This was a collection, a trophy pile. My blood ran cold as I cataloged the items with my flashlight. Some were relatively new. Others had clearly been exposed to the elements for years, perhaps decades. And beyond them, leading into that dark hollow beneath the tree, were fresh tracks, both the creatures and the families. The stories my grandfather told by firelight came rushing back. He spoke of the Kekle Kudleth, a hairy man who was said to take people into the deep caves of the mountains. Some versions of the legend said he ate them. Others claimed he kept them, turning them wild until they forgot their human lives. I drew my sidearm, checked that a round was chambered, and approached the opening. The musky odor I detected earlier was stronger here, mingled with the scent of damp earth and something else, something that reminded me of the bear den I'd once had to inspect after reports of poaching. "Hello," I called into the darkness, my voice echoing slightly. "This is Park Ranger Stevens. I'm here to help." From within came a sound that made my skin crawl, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate the very air around me. It wasn't aggressive exactly. It was territorial, a warning. I reached for my radio again out of habit, knowing it was useless. The search party would be at the campsite by now, but they wouldn't find my trail for hours. By then it would be dark, and no one would risk these woods at night, not even for a missing ranger. I was on my own, standing at the threshold of what could very well be my own grave. Taking a deep breath, I clicked on my tactical flashlight, the most powerful one I carried, and ducked into the opening beneath the ancient tree. The passageway sloped downward, the ceiling low enough that I had to crouch. Tree roots formed a natural lattice above me, soil clinging to them and occasionally dropping onto my shoulders as I moved. The air grew colder, damper, and the smell stronger. After about 30 feet, the tunnel widened into a larger chamber. My flashlight beam couldn't reach the far walls, but what it did illuminate stopped me cold. Along one side of the chamber were crude shelters made of branches and leaves, and huddled inside one of them was the missing family: a man, a woman, and 2 children, perhaps 8 and 10 years old. They were alive, apparently unharmed, but their eyes reflected my flashlight with a wild, animal-like quality that sent chills down my spine. "I'm Ranger Stevens," I said, approaching slowly, keeping my voice calm and even. "I'm here to take you back." The man, I recognized him from the photo in the missing persons report, pulled his children closer and made a strange guttural sound. The woman bared her teeth slightly. "Mr. Kendall," I tried again, remembering the family's name. "David Kendall. I'm with the Park Service. Your extended family reported you missing." Recognition flickered in the man's eyes, but it was distant, confused, as if I was reminding him of a dream he'd had long ago. How was this possible? They'd only been missing for a day. A low rumble from the shadows behind me answered my unspoken question. I whirled around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness to illuminate a massive figure. It stood over 8 feet tall, its broad frame covered in thick, dark hair. Its face was a strange amalgamation of human and ape-like features, a prominent brow, deep-set eyes that reflected red in my light, a flattened nose, and a mouth that seemed capable of both bestial snarls and something approaching speech. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Kekle-Kudla, the legendary creature of the deep woods, stood before me, very real and very dangerous. I raised my weapon instinctively, but something stopped me from firing. Perhaps it was the lack of aggressive posturing from the creature, or perhaps it was something deeper sense that I was facing not just an animal but an ancient intelligence. It made that rumbling sound again, and to my shock, the Kendall family responded with similar vocalizations. A conversation was happening that I couldn't understand. "They need to come with me," I said firmly, addressing the creature directly. "They don't belong here." The creature tilted its massive head, studying me with eyes that held more understanding than should be possible. It took a step forward, into the full beam of my light, and I saw what I hadn't noticed before. Around its neck hung a crude pendant made of polished stone. It was carved with symbols I recognized from the oldest Cherokee petroglyphs, symbols that predated European contact. This wasn't just a wild creature of the woods. This was something that had existed alongside my ancestors, something that had been part of these mountains for countless generations. It raised one massive hand, fingers splayed, showing me an open palm. Not aggressive, but not yielding either. Behind me, David Kendall spoke, his voice hoarse and strange, as if he'd forgotten how to use it properly. "We stay," he said. "We belong now." His wife nodded, her eyes fixed on the creature with something approaching reverence. "No," I said firmly. "Your family is waiting for you. Your parents, your siblings. People are searching for you right now." The creature made another sound, and David shook his head violently. "Chosen," he said. "We chosen." That's when I noticed the strange marks on their foreheads, patterns of what looked like mud or clay, forming symbols similar to those on the creature's pendant. Some kind of ritual had taken place here, something that had altered these people in ways I couldn't understand. The creature took another step toward me, and this time I sensed no peace in its approach. I raised my weapon again. "I'm taking them back," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "They have a right to choose, but they need to be of sound mind to do it." The creature's eyes narrowed, and it bared teeth that could tear through flesh with frightening ease. It understood me. I was certain of it now. And it did not want to let its chosen ones go. Chapter 3. The Chosen Ones. Time seemed to stop as the creature and I faced each other in the dim chamber beneath the ancient tree. Behind me, the Kendall family huddled together, their eyes darting between me and the massive being that had, for reasons I couldn't comprehend, selected them. In my 12 years as a ranger, I'd faced down territorial bears, rescued climbers from near-death situations, and navigated these mountains in the worst conditions imaginable. But nothing had prepared me for this standoff with a legend come to life. "Mr. Kendall," I said, not taking my eyes off the creature, "I need you and your family to come toward me slowly." David Kendall made that strange guttural sound again, then struggled to form words. "No danger, no harm. Whatever's happening here, we need to discuss it above ground," I insisted. "Your family has rights, but this isn't the way." The creature let out a low rumble and took another step forward. I tensed, my finger hovering near the trigger of my sidearm. "Don't," David said, his voice clearer now, urgent. "He, protector, ancient one." The creature raised its massive hand again, this time pointing at my chest, then at its own. A gesture of equivalence, recognition. That's when it clicked: the pendant, the symbols, the reverence in the family's eyes. This wasn't a random abduction. This was something cultural, ritualistic. Something that perhaps stretched back to the time when my Cherokee ancestors first encountered these beings in the deep woods. I lowered my weapon slightly, but kept it ready. "I'm listening," I said to both David and the creature. "But I have a duty to bring this family back safely." The creature made a series of sounds, grunts, and clicks that seemed to form a pattern. To my astonishment, Mrs. Kendall responded with similar sounds, then turned to me. "Chosen, protectors," she said haltingly. "Forest, dying, need, help." I struggled to understand. "You're saying this creature chose your family to help protect the forest?" She nodded emphatically, pointing to the strange markings on their foreheads. "Bond," she said. "Ancient bond." The creature moved again, this time retreating to the shadows of the chamber. It returned moments later, carrying something in its massive handsan object wrapped in what appeared to be animal hide. With surprising gentleness, it placed the object on the ground between us and unwrapped it. Inside was a stone tablet covered in petroglyphs, similar to those I'd seen in the oldest sacred sites of my tribe. But these were different, more detailed, showing human figures standing alongside taller, broader figures that could only be representatives of this creature's kind. David crawled forward, pointing at the tablet. "History," he said. "Your people, his people, together." I stared at the tablet, memories of my grandfather's stories rushing back. He'd spoken of the guardian spirits of the deep forest, beings that had taught the early Cherokee which plants could heal and which would kill, how to move through the mountains without disturbing their balance. "These petroglyphs," I said slowly, "they show cooperation between humans and your kind." I addressed this last part to the creature, who nodded its massive head once. Mrs. Kendall made another series of those strange sounds, and the creature responded. Then she looked at me. "Says, once, many human helpers, now, few, forest, sick." I looked around the chamber with new eyes. This wasn't a predator's den. It was a place of instruction, of initiation. The items outside weren't trophies, they were artifacts left behind by those who had been chosen before, perhaps over generations. "How many others?" I asked, gesturing to the crude shelters around the chamber. David held up 7 fingers. 7 families, many years. 7 other groups of people, chosen over what could be decades or even centuries, living in these woods as intermediaries between the creature's kind and humanity. It was almost impossible to believe, yet the evidence was before me. "And they stayed willingly," I pressed. David and his wife exchanged glances. After, understanding. Yes. The implications were staggering. People who had been mourned as dead, as victims of the wilderness, were potentially living different lives entirely, serving as some kind of forest guardians alongside these legendary creatures. The creature made another series of sounds, more urgent now. Mrs. Kendall listened intently, then turned to me. "Says, others, coming, your people, danger. The search party. They would have followed my trail by now, perhaps even discovered the entrance to this underground chamber. And they would come armed, ready to confront whatever had taken a family and now a ranger. I need to go back up," I said. "I need to stop them before they find this place." The creature's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "I won't reveal your location," I promised, "but I need to report that I found the family safe." "Not safe," David said. "Chosen. Important." I took a deep breath. "Mr. Kendall, whatever's happening here, there are proper channels. Your family was reported missing. People are worried. They're searching for you right now." "No, return," Mrs. Kendall said firmly. "Our purpose now." I looked at their children, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. They showed no signs of fear, no signs of distress. If anything, they seemed fascinated by the creature, watching its every move with wide, curious eyes. "The children deserve a choice," I said. "They deserve to grow up in the world they were born into, at least until they're old enough to decide for themselves." The creature made a low, mournful sound. Then, to my surprise, it reached out one massive hand and gently touched the head of the youngest child. The boy smiled up at it without fear. David spoke again, his words coming more easily now. "Children, special, see, truth, adults, forget." A sound from the tunnel leading to the surface interrupted our strange dialogue. Voices, distant but drawing closer. The search party had found the entrance. The creature straightened to its full height, a growl building in its chest. The family huddled closer together, fear in their eyes for the first time. "Hide," I said quickly. "I'll speak to them." I moved toward the tunnel entrance, but before I could reach it, the creature grabbed my arm with surprising speed. Its grip was like iron, but it didn't hurt me. It stared into my eyes, and in that moment, I felt something pass between use and understanding that went beyond words. It released me and made a series of gestures, pointing to the family, to itself, to me, and then upward, toward the surface. "He wants you. Understand," David translated haltingly. "See, truth, then decide." "There's no time," I said, hearing the voices growing closer. The creature reached for its pendant and removed it from around its neck. It pressed the stone carving into my palm and closed my fingers around it. "Symbol," Mrs. Kendall explained. "Trust. Return. Alone. Learn." I nodded, tucking the pendant into my pocket. "I'll come back," I promised. "But for now, stay hidden." The creature retreated into the shadows of the chamber, taking the family with it. I turned and hurried into the tunnel, meeting the search party halfway. "Stevens," exclaimed Rodriguez, one of the county rescue team members. "Thank God, did you find them?" I hesitated for just a moment. "No sign of the family in this direction," I lied. "Just some strange tracks that led me to this old root cellar, probably used by settlers a century ago." Rodriguez looked past me, his flashlight beam probing the darkness. "What's down there?" "Nothing but roots and dirt," I said. "I've been searching for hours. We should head back, regroup, try another direction." He seemed suspicious but nodded. "The rest of the team is checking the western ridge. Let's join them." As we climbed back to the surface, I felt the weight of the stone pendant in my pocket. I had just lied to a fellow rescue worker, violated every protocol I was sworn to uphold. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had glimpsed something profound in that underground chamber, something that connected to my heritage in ways I was only beginning to understand. The creature, the Kekle Kudle of my grandfather's stories, was real, and it had chosen me as surely as it had chosen the Kendall family. That night, as the search continued in all the wrong places, I sat alone in my cabin, examining the pendant by lamplight. The symbols carved into its surface seemed to shift and change as I turned it, telling a story I could almost, but not quite, comprehend. Tomorrow, I would return to the ancient tree, alone, and I would learn the truth about the guardians of these mountains, whatever the cost. Dawn broke over the mountains, painting the mist-shrouded peaks in shades of gold and pink. I'd barely slept, my mind racing with everything I'd witnessed beneath the ancient tree. The stone pendant lay heavy in my palm as I sat on my cabin porch, watching the first light of day filter through the pines. My radio crackled to life. "Stevens, you copy? Meeting at base camp in 30. "Copy that," I responded automatically. I should have been preparing for another day of searching, a search I knew would be fruitless. Instead, I found myself tracing the strange symbols on the pendant, feeling an inexplicable connection to them. My grandfather had once told me that the old ways of knowing weren't lost, merely forgotten. "Our ancestors speak to us still," he'd said, "if only we remember how to listen." I closed my eyes, trying to listen with more than my ears. The forest around my cabin seemed to pulse with life, the chittering of squirrels, the songs of warblers, the whisper of wind through leaves. But beneath those familiar sounds was something else, something I'd never noticed before, a rhythm, like a heartbeat, emanating from the depths of the old-growth forest. My decision made itself. I called in to say I was checking a lead several miles from the actual search area, packed my gear, and headed back toward the ancient tree. The forest felt different today. Where yesterday it had seemed ominous and forbidding, today it felt aware, alive in a way that went beyond biology. I found myself noticing details I'd overlooked for years, the way certain trees grew in patterns that couldn't be coincidental, the way game trails converged at points that offered the best vantage of the valleys below. These weren't random features. They were designed, cultivated over generations by something that understood the forest as a single, living entity. As I approached the ravine leading to the ancient tree, I felt the pendant grow warm against my chest where I'd hung it on a leather cord. Not hot enough to burn, but noticeably warmer than body temperature. The entrance beneath the tree roots stood open, just as I'd left it. No sign remained of yesterday's search party. I'd made sure they marked this area as cleared. Taking a deep breath, I ducked into the opening and made my way down the earthen tunnel. The chamber beyond was empty. No sign of the Kendall family, no sign of the creature. But the shelters remained, and the stone tablet still lay where it had been placed. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing slightly in the underground space. "I came back as promised." Silence answered me. I approached the stone tablet, kneeling beside it to examine the petroglyphs more carefully in the beam of my flashlight. They told a story that much was clear now. A story of first contact between my ancestors and the creatures of the deep forest. Some of the symbols matched those on ancient Cherokee artifacts I'd seen in museums, but others were entirely unknown to me. As I studied the tablet, I became aware of a presence behind me. I didn't hear it approach. Being that size, moving without sound seemed impossible, but I felt it, a change in the air pressure of the chamber, the sense of being watched. I turned slowly to find the creature standing just beyond the reach of my light, its eyes reflecting red in the darkness. "I came back," I said, standing to face it. "I want to understand." The creature made that rumbling sound again, then stepped forward into the light. In daylight, filtered through the roots above, I could see details I'd missed the night before. Its face, while definitely not human, held expression and intelligence. Its hair wasn't uniformly dark, but varied in color and texture across its body. And around its wrists were what appeared to be woven bands of plant fiber, deliberate adornment. This was no mere animal. This was a being with culture, with history. It gestured to the pendant I wore, then to itself. "Yes," I said. "I accepted your token. I came alone." It nodded once, then turned and moved toward the back of the chamber, clearly expecting me to follow. I hesitated only briefly before falling in step behind it. A narrow passage I hadn't noticed before led deeper underground. As we walked, I noticed symbols carved into the earthen wall, some fresh, others worn with age. Generations of markings, a written record of sorts. The passage opened into another, larger chamber, and I stopped short at the threshold, my breath catching in my throat. The space beyond was illuminated by shafts of sunlight filtering through carefully constructed openings in the ceiling. And in that natural light stood the Kendall family alongside 7 other groups of people, the chosen ones David had mentioned. They ranged in age from children younger than the Kendalls to elderly individuals with weather-beaten faces and wild white hair. And among them moved 3 more creatures smaller than my guide, but unmistakably of the same kind. A family group, perhaps. They all turned to look at me as I entered, human and non-human alike. The expressions on the human faces ranged from curiosity to wariness to what appeared to be pity. An elderly man separated himself from the group and approached me. His clothes were tattered but had clearly once been modern hiking gear. Around his neck hung a pendant similar to mine. "You are Cherokee," he said, his voice rough from disuse but his words clear. "That is good. Your people remember, even if they do not know they remember." "Who are you?" I asked. "How long have you been down here?" He smiled, revealing surprisingly well-maintained teeth. "I am was Dr. Thomas Blackwood, anthropologist, University of North Carolina. I came to these mountains in 1981 to study Cherokee petroglyphs." He gestured to the creatures. "I found something much more significant. 1981A. This man had been living underground with these creatures for over 40 years. "The others?" I asked, looking at the assembled group. "Chosen over many years," he explained. "Some recent, like the Kendall family. Others," he nodded toward an elderly couple, "have been here since before my time." "Chosen for what?" I pressed. "What's happening here?" Dr. Blackwood exchanged glances with the large creature that had led me here. Some unspoken communication passed between them. "Walk with me," he said, leading me toward the center of the chamber where a pool of clear water reflected the sunlight from above. "What do you know of your Cherokee ancestors' relationship with these mountains?" "That they considered them sacred," I replied. "That they believed guardian spirits dwelled in the deepest forests." He nodded. "Not spirits, guardians." He gestured to the creatures. "The Sanagagwali, those who live apart. Your people knew them, respected them, learned from them." "Bigfoot," I said. "Sasquatch." Dr. Blackwood grimaced. "Crude names for beings that predate human civilization in these mountains. They were here first, Ranger Stevens. And they allowed us to stay, to learn, to become part of the forest's cycle. Until colonization, I guessed." "Yes. As white settlers pushed into these lands, the Sanagagwali retreated deeper into the mountains. The old agreements were forgotten, the balance shifted." He gestured to the pool and I looked down into its clear depths. At first I saw only my own reflection. Then something changed. The water seemed to ripple of its own accord, and images formed beneath its surface, images of clear-cut mountainsides, polluted streams, dying wildlife. The forest is dying, Dr. Blackwood said solemnly, not just here, but everywhere. The Skinwalker have maintained the balance for thousands of years, but they cannot do it alone anymore. They need intermediaries, people who understand the human world but are willing to learn the old ways. The chosen ones, I said, understanding dawning. But why take people against their will? Why not reach out openly? One of the creatures, a smaller one with silver-streaked hair, approached the pool and made a series of complex vocalizations. Dr. Blackwood listened, then translated. She asks if you believe your government would acknowledge their existence peacefully, or would they be hunted, studied, confined? I had no answer. I knew how the discovery of such beings would play out in the modern world. The choosing is not random. Dr. Blackwood continued. They watch. They select people who show respect for the forest, who have the capacity to understand what is at stake, and no one is kept against their true will. The Kendalls seemed altered, I pointed out. Not fully themselves. The bonding process is disorienting at first, he admitted. The Skinwalker share their awareness of the forest, their way of sensing its rhythms, its needs. The human mind needs time to adjust to such perception. The large creature that had first encountered me made a deep rumbling sound and placed one massive hand on my shoulder. Through my jacket, I could feel the surprising warmth of its palm. He says you were chosen long ago, Dr. Blackwood translated. When you were a child, you camped with your grandfather in the Western Valley. You wandered away, became lost. Do you remember? A memory surfaced. I had half convinced myself was a dream. I was 7 years old, separated from my grandfather during a camping trip. Night fell, and I was alone, terrified. Then, a large figure had found me, led me back toward my grandfather's campfire, vanishing before we reached it. That was real? I whispered. Dr. Blackwood nodded. You were marked then, watched. Your return to these mountains as a ranger was no coincidence. The weight of this revelation settled over me. I had been chosen long before I knew there was anything to be chosen for. What exactly are you asking of me? I asked, looking from Dr. Blackwood to the creatures. To disappear, to join you down here? No, he said. Your role is different. You walk in both worlds already, the world of humans and the world of the forest. You can serve as a bridge, a protector. Help us protect the chosen ones. Help us restore the balance before it's too late. And the Kendalls, the others, they stay here? For now. Until they learn, until they can serve their purpose. I thought of the search parties combing the mountains, of families mourning loved ones presumed dead, of the Kendalls' extended family waiting for news. There has to be a better way, I said. People don't just disappear without consequences. Dr. Blackwood's expression darkened. We tried other approaches. In the 1960s, several Skinwalker revealed themselves to scientists they believed they could trust. Those scientists were discredited, their evidence confiscated. One of the Skinwalker was killed, his body taken to a government facility. The creatures around us made sounds of distress at this recounting. The modern world is not ready to acknowledge what it cannot control. Dr. Blackwood continued. But it may be ready to save what it loves, the wild places, the ancient forests. That can be done without revealing the Skinwalker's existence. I looked around at the assembled humans and creatures, this strange, secret community living beneath the ancient forest. Part of me wanted to reject everything I was hearing, to return to the surface and the comfortable certainties of my life. But the pendant hung heavy around my neck, and the memory of being saved as a child burned bright in my mind. What would I have to do? I asked finally. The largest creature approached, carrying another stone tablet. This one was marked with a map of the national forest, with certain areas highlighted by symbols I didn't recognize. Dr. Blackwood traced the markings with his finger. These are the sacred groves, the places where the forest's energy is strongest, where the Skinwalker maintain the balance. They need protection. Your position as a ranger gives you influence over trail placement, camping regulations, conservation efforts. You want me to steer people away from these areas, I said, understanding. And to watch for those who might be chosen next, he added, to help ease their transition, to ensure they aren't simply declared missing and forgotten. It was so much to absorb, so much responsibility, and yet, looking into the intelligent eyes of these creatures, these first inhabitants of my ancestral lands, I felt a connection that transcended my modern skepticism. The largest Sanagogwili made that rumbling sound again, then spoke in a deep, halting voice that seemed to come from its chest rather than its throat. Protect, for, est, protect, people, protect, us. I stared in shock. You can speak our language. Dr. Blackwood nodded. With difficulty. Their vocal structures are different, but they understand far more than they can say. The creature extended its massive hand toward me, palm up, waiting. In that moment, I stood at a crossroads between two worlds: the modern human world I had always known, and an ancient reality that had existed alongside it, unseen and unacknowledged. My decision would affect not just my life, but the lives of the chosen ones, the Sanagogwili, and perhaps the future of the forest itself. I thought of my grandfather's teachings, of the sacred responsibility to protect these lands that had been passed down through generations of my family. And I realized that this was not a new path at all, but the continuation of an ancient one. I placed my hand in the creature's open palm, feeling the rough texture of its skin against mine. I will help you, I said. I will protect the forest, the people, and your kind. But we do this my way: no more families disappearing without explanation, no more leaving loved ones to wonder and grieve. The creature's hand closed gently around mine, sealing our pact. And in that moment, beneath the ancient tree, I became what my ancestors had been centuries before: a bridge between worlds, a guardian of old knowledge, a protector of secrets that the modern world was not yet ready to hear. 6 months have passed since my encounter beneath the ancient tree. 6 months since I placed my hand in the massive palm of the Sanagogwili and accepted a responsibility that has transformed my understanding of these mountains and my place within them. Winter has settled over the forest, draping the pines in mantles of snow and ice. The tourist season has ended, leaving the wilderness to those who truly belong here. In this quiet season, I've had time to establish new patterns, new ways of fulfilling my dual roles as park ranger and guardian of ancient secrets. The Kendall family officially remains missing. The search was called off after 3 weeks of finding nothing but false leads and empty forest. I attended the memorial service in a small church in Asheville, watching their extended family mourn for people who were very much alive. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But I kept my promise to find a better way. 2 weeks ago, Mrs. Kendall's sister received an anonymous letter, postmarked from a town across the Canadian border. The letter explained that the family had chosen to start a new life away from the pressures of modern society, that they were safe and happy, and that perhaps, someday, they might return. Enclosed was a recent photograph of the family standing before a snow-covered landscape, their faces healthy and smiling. The letter was, of course, a carefully crafted fiction. The Kendalls remain in the mountains, learning from the Sanagogwili, gradually becoming part of that hidden community beneath the ancient tree. But the letter has given their family something they desperately needed: closure, and the fragile hope that their loved ones are still alive somewhere. Similar letters have been arranged for the families of other chosen ones, carefully staged to suggest new lives in remote locations rather than disappearances into the forest. It's not a perfect solution, but it's better than endless uncertainty. My own role has evolved in ways I never anticipated. On the surface, I remain Ranger James Stevens, dedicated protector of Salagi National Forest. I file my reports, I lead the occasional tour group, I enforce park regulations with the same diligence I always have. But my patrols now follow patterns dictated by more than Park Service protocols. I monitor the sacred groves marked on the Sanagogwili stone map, ensuring that human intrusion remains minimal. I've advocated successfully for several conservation zones that restrict human access to the most sensitive areas, citing rare plant species or erosion concerns rather than the truth. And I watch for potential chosen one shikers and campers who show unusual reverence for the forest, who seem to sense something deeper in these mountains than mere recreation. I observe them from a distance, noting names and patterns, passing this information to Dr. Blackwood and the Sanagogwili during my regular visits beneath the ancient tree. Today is one such visit. As I approach the massive tulip poplar, snow crunching beneath my boots, I feel the familiar warmth of the pendant against my chest. It has become more than a symbol, it's a conduit of sorts, enhancing my awareness of the forest in ways I'm still learning to understand. The entrance beneath the roots is more concealed in winter, but my eyes know where to look. I clear away the light covering of snow and dead leaves, and slip into the earthen tunnel that has become as familiar to me as the trail to my own cabin. The chamber beyond is warmer than the forest above, the natural insulation of earth and root maintaining a temperature that remains comfortable even in the depths of winter. I'm expected, I always am these days. The Sanagogwili seem to sense my approach long before I arrive. Dr. Blackwood greets me at the entrance to the main chamber, his wild white beard now trimmed neatly, his posture more upright than when I first met him. Returning to regular contact with another ranger, another bridge between worlds, has rekindled something in the old anthropologist. "Adahai," he says, using my Cherokee name as he always does in this place. "Welcome. There have been developments." He leads me into the chamber where the pool reflects the winter sunlight from above. The Kendall children are there, helping one of the younger Sanagogwili sort through a collection of plants, learning the old knowledge of forest medicine that my ancestors once practiced. They look up and wave to me, their eyes clear and aware. The initial disorientation of their choosing has passed, leaving them changed but fully conscious, fully themselves again. They've adapted to this strange dual existence faster than their parents, as children often do. "The forest spoke last night," Dr. Blackwood says, his voice low. "The eldest Sanagogwili had a vision. Among the hidden community, such visions are treated with the utmost seriousness. The eldest Sanagogwili, a female with silver white hair and eyes that seem to contain the wisdom of centuries, rarely shares her insights with humans. When she does, it portends significant change." "What did she see?" I ask, feeling a flutter of apprehension. "Strangers coming to the eastern valleys," he replies. "Men with machines, seeking what lies beneath the earth." My heart sinks. I know immediately what this means. For months there have been rumors of mineral rights being investigated in the counties surrounding the national forest. The park itself is protected, but its boundaries are not immutable if valuable resources are discovered. "Surveyors," I say, "prospectors." Dr. Blackwood nods grimly. "The eldest believes they seek the rare earth elements that lie deep beneath the sacred groves, elements that have contributed to the unique properties of this forest for millennia. The implications are staggering. Mining operations, even outside the official boundaries of the park, could disrupt the ancient balance the Sanagogwili have maintained. The runoff alone could poison streams that feed the heart of the forest." "What does she suggest we do?" I ask. Before Dr. Blackwood can answer, a deep, rumbling voice speaks from the shadows of the chamber. "Show truth to right people." The largest Sanagogwilite one I first encountered, whom I now know is called something that translates roughly to "River Stone steps into the light." In the months since our first meeting, we've developed a connection that transcends the limitations of language, a mutual respect built on shared purpose. "Show the truth?" I repeat, uncertain. "You mean, reveal your existence?" Riverstone makes a negative gesture, not a human headshake, but his own equivalent. "Not all, few, chosen." Dr. Blackwood clarifies. "The eldest believes it's time to expand our circle of guardians. Not just individuals who leave their old lives behind, but influential people who can return to the human world, carrying the knowledge of what must be protected." "You're talking about showing yourselves to people who would have the power to stop the mining," I say, understanding dawning. "Scientists, politicians, people with influence." "Carefully chosen," Dr. Blackwood emphasizes. "People whose words carry weight, but who also have the wisdom to understand why some truths must remain hidden from the wider world. It's a dangerous proposition. Expanding the circle of knowledge always increases the risk of exposure. But I also understand the necessity. The traditional methods of protection, chosen ones living in seclusion, rangers like me subtly redirecting human activity, may not be enough to counter the threat of modern resource extraction. "I know someone," I say after a moment of consideration. "Dr. Eleanor Chen. She's an environmental scientist who's been studying the unique biodiversity of these mountains for years. She has connections in Washington, respect in the scientific community, and she has an unusual openness to possibilities beyond conventional understanding." Riverstone and Dr. Blackwood exchange glances. "You trust this woman?" Dr. Blackwood asks. "With my life," I reply, "and with your secret." Riverstone makes that rumbling sound that I've come to recognize as thoughtful consideration. Then he nods once, decisively. "Bring her when snow melts." Spring, a time of renewal, of new beginnings. a fitting season to expand the circle of guardians. There will be others we need to bring in as well, I say, thinking aloud. People with different kinds of influence, a carefully constructed network. A return to the old ways, Dr. Blackwood says, a hint of wonder in his voice. When my ancestors first came to these mountains, they approached the indigenous peoples with arrogance, seeing only primitives living in harmony with nature. They never understood that this harmony was not simple, not accidental, but the result of ancient agreements with beings like the Sanagogwili, guardians who taught humans how to live as part of the forest rather than its conquerors. Riverstone places his massive hand on my shoulder, the gesture that has become his way of conveying trust and solidarity. Protect, balance, he says, together. As I prepare to return to the surface, to my cabin and my radio and the human world that still claims the majority of my time, I feel the weight of this new phase of our mission. The stakes have never been higher, not just for the Sanagogwili and the chosen ones, but for the forest itself, for the delicate balance that has been maintained here since time immemorial. I think of my grandfather, of the stories he told by firelight, of the knowledge he passed to me that I only now truly understand. He knew, perhaps not everything, but enough. Enough to guide me toward this path, to prepare me for the role I now embrace. As I emerge from beneath the ancient tree into the winter twilight, snow begins to foliage, soft flakes drifting down through the canopy. The forest is silent save for the gentle whisper of snow on pine needles. But in that silence I sense a presence, a watchfulness, an awareness that extends far beyond my limited human perception. The Sanagogwili are out there, moving through their ancient territories. The chosen ones are learning the old ways beneath the earth. And I stand between these worlds, a guardian of secrets older than my nation, older perhaps than human civilization itself. I adjust my pack and begin the long hike back to my cabin, the pendant warm against my chest despite the winter chill. Above me, the first stars appear in the darkening sky, the same stars that watched over these mountains when the first humans encountered the Sanagogwili countless generations ago. Some would call the agreement we've renewed superstition, the product of primitive minds unable to comprehend the natural world through science. But I've seen enough now to know that the most primitive assumption of all is that humans are the only beings capable of consciousness, of culture, of stewardship. The truth is both simpler and more complex. We have never been alone in these forests, and our future depends on remembering how to share them. As the ranger who walks between worlds, as Adahi who lives in the woods, I have accepted this truth and the responsibility that comes with it. With spring will come new guardians, new challenges, new hopes for preserving the ancient balance. Until then, I watch, I protect, I remember. And in the deepest part of these mountains, beneath an ancient tree, the Sanagogwili remember too. My name is Kanati Thunderheart, and I am the living embodiment of my Cherokee ancestors' sacred duty as guardians of the hunt. The name Kanati, passed down through 7 generations of my family, means the first man and guardian of the hunt in our ancient tongue. My great-grandmother, one of the last native speakers of Cherokee in our bloodline, whispered to me as a child that names carry power, that they bind us to purposes greater than ourselves. I never understood what she meant until I took my oath as a park ranger in the Nantahala National Forest, deep in the mountains of western North Carolina. The forest chose me as much as I chose it. These ancient peaks, where my people once walked freely before the trail of tears scattered us like leaves in a cruel wind, still echo with the footsteps of spirits both benevolent and terrible. The Cherokee word Nantahala means land of the noonday sun, referring to the deep gorges where sunlight only penetrates at midday. But we rangers know there are places in these woods where the sun never reaches, where shadows move independently of their sources, and where the old laws still govern the darkness. I had been stationed at the Nantahala Ranger District for 3 years when the Morrison family disappeared. It was early October, the kind of perfect autumn day that draws hikers from across the southeast to witness our mountains draped in crimson and gold. The air carried that crisp promise of winter, sharp enough to make your breath visible but warm enough to shed layers as you climbed. Perfect weather for hiking, my supervisor Brad Kellerman noted grimly as he handed me the missing persons report. Perfect weather for people to venture deeper into the wilderness than their experience level warranted. James Morrison, 34, his wife Sarah, 31, and their twin daughters Emma and Lily, both 8 years old, had set out for what should have been a simple day hike on the Bartram Trail. James had checked in at our visitor center the previous morning, confident and well prepared, or so he appeared. He carried a detailed topographic map, marked their intended route in red ink, and assured our volunteer coordinator that they would be back before sunset. They planned to hike 4 miles to Wyabald, enjoy lunch with the panoramic views, and return via the same trail, a routine family outing that hundreds complete safely every weekend. When they failed to return by dark, Sarah's sister contacted local authorities. By dawn, I was leading a search and rescue team into the forest, following their last known trajectory. We found their car exactly where James had said it would be, parked at the Wya Gap trailhead with the doors unlocked and hiking packs clearly visible through the windows. That first red flag made my stomach tighten with an emotion I could not yet name. The Bartram Trail showed clear signs of their passage for the first 2 miles. James wore size 11 Morel hiking boots with a distinctive star pattern on the sole. Sarah wore size 7 Salomons with circular treads, and the girls both had matching pink sneakers with heart-shaped patterns pressed into the rubber. Their prints appeared at regular intervals in the soft earth, accompanied by the small circular depressions of trekking poles. Everything seemed normal until we reached Devil's Courthouse Gap, where the prints simply ended. Not disappeared gradually, as if they had turned onto another trail or walked onto rockier ground. Ended. 4 sets of footprints stopped in the middle of the path as if the family had been lifted straight up into the canopy. The last clear print showed James's left boot, with the full weight-bearing impression of someone taking a normal step forward. 6 inches ahead, nothing. Just empty trail stretching toward Wyabald, undisturbed except by wind-blown leaves. I radioed for additional teams and spent the next 6 hours systematically searching every game trail, creek bed, and rocky outcrop within a 2-mile radius. My Cherokee grandfather taught me to read the forest like a book, to notice when birds fell silent or when the wind carried scents that did not belong. As the afternoon wore on, I became increasingly aware that something fundamental was wrong with this section of woods. The normal sounds of forest life, birdsong, insect buzzing, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush had ceased entirely. Even the wind seemed muted, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. It was nearly sunset when I found the first sign that we were dealing with something beyond a simple hiking accident. 20 yards off the main trail, partially hidden beneath a fallen oak, I discovered one of the girls' pink sneakers. The shoe was pristine, as if it had been carefully placed, rather than lost, during a panicked flight through the woods. More disturbing still, it contained no foot, no sock, no sign of struggle or violence. Just an empty shoe sitting in the leaves like an offering. That night, I called my grandmother Elise, one of the few elders in our family who still remembered the old stories in their original context. When I described the disappearance and the unnatural silence that had fallen over that section of forest, her voice grew heavy with recognition and fear. "Kanati," she said, using the reverent tone she reserved for matters of spiritual significance. "You have found the hunting ground of Sulkalu." The name sent ice through my veins. Sulkalu, the slant-eyed giant, the great lord of the game. In Cherokee mythology, he was the master of all wild animals, dwelling in the far western mountains in a place called Tsunagunye. Traditional stories described him as a giant with sloping eyes who controlled the movements of deer, bear, and all creatures that hunters pursued. But Elise's stories, the ones she had learned from her grandmother, who was born before the removal, painted a far darker picture. "He is older than the white man's coming," she whispered into the phone. "Older than our people's arrival in these mountains. When he walks, the forest holds its breath. When he hunts, animals flee for territories far from his path. And when he chooses human prey." Her voice trailed off, but I understood. The Morrison family had not simply gotten lost. They had been selected. "What must I do?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would require me to walk a path between my duties as a federal law enforcement officer and my obligations as a Cherokee guardian. "You must remember what you are, grandson. You are Kanati, the first hunter, the protector of the balance between human and animal worlds. But Sulkalu recognizes only the old laws, the old protections. If you enter his territory wearing only the white man's uniform, carrying only the white man's tools, you will join those he has taken." She instructed me to visit her the following evening, after the official search was suspended for the day. She would provide me with what I needed to face the slant-eyed giant, tools and knowledge that predated the establishment of national forests by thousands of years. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my real training for this rescue mission was about to begin. The next day brought no trace of the Morrison family despite expanded search efforts involving K-9 units, helicopter overflights, and teams of experienced mountain rescue volunteers. We found no additional footprints, no torn clothing, no signs of bear or other predator activity. It was as if 4 people had simply been erased from existence while walking a well-maintained trail in broad daylight. As evening approached and the official search was called off until morning, I felt the weight of ancestral responsibility settling on my shoulders like a hand from the spirit world. My Cherokee name was not mere heritage ornamentation, I realized. It was a calling, a cosmic appointment that had been waiting for this moment to reveal its true purpose. Somewhere in the darkening forest, a family waited for salvation that could only come from someone who remembered the old ways, who could speak to powers that existed long before the first European set foot in these mountains. I was about to discover whether 3 years of ranger training and a lifetime of Cherokee upbringing would be enough to face a creature that even my ancestors approached with fear and reverence. The drive to my grandmother's house took me through Cherokee lands that had survived the removal small enclaves where our people had hidden in the mountains during that brutal winter of 1838. Elise lived in a modest cabin on the Qualla boundary, the reservation where the eastern band of Cherokee had slowly rebuilt their lives after the Trail of Tears. As I wound through the mountain roads, I could feel the transition from the white world's version of these mountains to the Cherokee world's deeper, more dangerous reality. Elise's cabin was older than the reservation itself, built by her great-grandfather who had refused to register for removal and had lived like a ghost in these hills for decades. The logs were dark with age and smoke, and the rooms smelled of sage, cedar, and something else scent I recognized as the smell of old knowledge, of secrets kept in shadows. She was waiting for me on the porch with items arranged on a blanket that looked as ancient as the mountains themselves. Without preamble, she began my education in matters the Park Service manual had never covered. "Tzul'kalu is not evil as white men understand evil," she began, her weathered hands moving over objects I could not yet identify. "He is the manifestation of natural law, the reminder that humans are not the apex predators we believe ourselves to be. In the old times, our hunters knew to leave offerings, to ask permission, to take only what was given freely. When they forgot these courtesies, Tzul'kalu would remind them of their place in the order of things." She lifted a carved wooden mask, its features exaggerated and fierce, painted in colors that seemed to shift in the lamplight. "This is a booger mask, made in the image of Tzul'kalu's face. When our warriors needed to enter his territory, they would wear these to confuse him, to make him think he faced another of his kind. The magic works, but only for those who understand the price." The mask felt heavier than wood should feel, and when I held it up to examine the craftsmanship, I felt as if something was looking back at me through the eye holes. The features were distinctly non-human, slanting eyes that seemed to follow movement, a broad nose that flared with painted nostrils, and a mouth carved in a permanent expression of primal intelligence. This was not a caricature or ceremonial ornament. It was a portrait. "The second protection," Elise continued, "is the word of unbinding. If Tzul'kalu captures you, if his influence enters your mind and you feel your will slipping away, you must speak Adansdi with all the authority of your Cherokee blood. It means leave or go away, but it carries the power of banishment when spoken by one who truly belongs to these mountains." She made me practice the pronunciation until the word flowed naturally from my tongue, until it felt like something I had always known rather than recently learned. Adan versus D, with emphasis on the middle syllable, the sound rising and falling like traditional Cherokee speech patterns. "But remember," she warned, her eyes reflecting depths that spoke of terrible knowledge, "these protections work only if you enter his realm with proper respect, with understanding that you walk in his territory as a guest, not a conqueror. The moment you forget this, the moment you let the white man's arrogance cloud your judgment, you become prey like any other." She also gave me a small leather pouch containing what she called the old tobacco, leaves grown from seeds that had been passed down through generations, harvested and cured according to traditions that predated European contact. "Scatter this at the threshold of his domain," she instructed. It is an offering, a declaration of peaceful intent. Even Sulkalu respects the protocols of diplomacy. As I prepared to leave, my grandmother caught my arm with surprising strength. "One more thing, grandson. The white man's technology will not function properly in Sulkalu's immediate presence. Your radio, your GPS, your flashlight all may fail when you need them most. Trust your Cherokee senses, the ones your grandfather taught you to use. Follow the signs that only our people know how to read." I returned to my ranger station just after midnight, my official gear supplemented now with tools that would appear to my colleagues as primitive superstition. But as I prepared to enter the forest alone, violating every safety protocol in the Ranger Handbook, I felt more prepared for what lay ahead than I had during any of my formal training. The plan was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. I would enter the section of forest where the Morrison family had vanished, following their trail until I reached the place where the footprints ended. From there, I would proceed deeper into Sulkalu's territory, using the Cherokee protections my grandmother had provided, until I found either the missing family or evidence of their fate. I left my ranger station at 4 a.m., choosing to begin my search in the deep darkness before dawn when the veil between worlds was thinnest. The drive to Waya Gap was conducted in complete silence, no radio chatter, no music, no distractions from the gravity of what I was about to attempt. The mountains seemed to loom larger in the darkness, their familiar silhouettes transformed into alien landscapes by shadow and imagination. At the trailhead, I performed the ritual my grandmother had described, scattering the ancient tobacco while speaking a Cherokee prayer for protection and wisdom. The words felt strange on my tongue, phrases I had never learned but somehow knew, as if the language was awakening in my blood after lying dormant for generations. The first 2 miles of trail passed without incident, my flashlight illuminating the same path I had searched with the official rescue teams. But as I approached Devil's Courthouse Gap, where the Morrison family's footprints had mysteriously ended, I began to notice changes that had not been present during the daylight search. The silence Elise had warned me about descended like a suffocating blanket. No nightbirds called, no insects buzzed, no wind stirred the trees. Even my own footsteps seemed muffled, as if the earth itself was absorbing sound. When I reached the spot where the family's trail ended, I found something that made my blood freeze: new footprints. These were not human tracks. Each print was nearly 2 feet long and 8 inches wide, showing clear impressions of 5 toes but no visible heel. The stride length suggested a creature at least 8 feet tall, moving with a gait that was neither fully human nor fully animal. The prints pressed deep into the earth despite the dry conditions, indicating massive weight. More unsettling still, the tracks seemed to follow the Morrison family's trail before veering off into the dense forest to the west, toward the high peaks where Cherokee tradition placed Sulkalu's stronghold. As I studied the prints with my flashlight, I realized they were not random animal tracks. They were deliberate, purposeful, the footprints of something that had been stalking the family for some distance before revealing itself. I clipped the booger mask to my belt and checked my compass bearing. West-northwest, toward Waya Bald and beyond it, into territory that appeared on no Park Service maps, land that had been considered sacred and forbidden by my ancestors for reasons I was beginning to understand. As I left the official trail and began following the giant footprints into the wilderness, my radio crackled with static and went dead. My GPS unit flickered and displayed impossible coordinates. My flashlight dimmed despite fresh batteries, forcing me to rely on the pale moonlight filtering through the canopy. But my Cherokee senses, the ones my grandfather had spent years teaching me to trust, were sharper than they had ever been. I could smell the forest with new clarity, the loamy richness of decomposing leaves, the green scent of moss and ferns, and underneath it all something else. A musk that belonged to no animal I had ever encountered, heavy and earthy and unmistakably ancient. I was no longer simply a park ranger following standard search and rescue protocols. I had become Kanati, the guardian of the hunt, walking a shadow path between worlds to face a creature that existed in the spaces between Cherokee legend and terrifying reality. Somewhere ahead in the darkness, the Morrison family was waiting. Whether they were still alive, still human, still themselves, these were questions I would have answered before dawn broke over the Nantahala Mountains. The real hunt was about to begin. 3 hours of tracking through unmarked wilderness brought me to a place that existed on no modern map but lived vividly in Cherokee memory. My grandmother had described Sunigunye as a hidden valley where the normal laws of nature bent to accommodate something far older than human civilization. As I crested a ridge that should not have been there according to my topographic map, I found myself looking down into a bowl-shaped clearing surrounded by ancient hemlocks that towered like cathedral spires into the pre-dawn darkness. The smell hit me first, that primitive musk I had been following, now so strong it seemed to coat the inside of my throat. Mixed with it was something else, the scent of humans, alive but changed, carrying undertones of fear and something I could only describe as resignation. The Morrison family was here, somewhere in this primordial sanctuary that predated national parks by millennia. At the center of the clearing stood a structure that defied immediate comprehension. It was not quite a dwelling, not quite a natural formation, but something between the two, a massive lean-to constructed from entire tree trunks, their bark still intact but darkened with age and something that might have been blood. The construction showed intelligence but not human reasoning. The logs were arranged in patterns that hurt to look at directly, creating optical illusions that made the structure seem larger from one angle, smaller from another. And there, sitting motionless at the entrance to this impossible shelter, was Tzul'kalu himself. He was larger than any creature I had been prepared to encounter, even after studying the tracks for miles. 9 feet tall at minimum, broader across the shoulders than any bear, with arms that hung nearly to his knees when he sat. His body was covered in dark hair that seemed to absorb moonlight rather than reflect it, and his face, when he turned those slanted eyes toward me, held an intelligence that was ancient when my own ancestors first walked these mountains. But it was not the size or the primitive power of him that nearly broke my nerve. It was the absolute certainty in his posture, the patience of something that had been waiting for my arrival with the confidence of a predator that knew its prey must eventually come within reach. I forced myself to remember my grandmother's teachings as I approached the edge of the clearing. This was not a monster to be fought with bullets or badges. This was a manifestation of natural law, a guardian of boundaries that humans had forgotten they should not cross. My hand moved to the booger mask at my belt, but before I could put it on, Tzul'kalu spoke. The voice was not what I expected. Deep, certainly, with harmonics that seemed to resonate in my chest cavity, but unmistakably articulate. He spoke in Cherokee, the old dialect that existed before European influence changed our language, words that I somehow understood despite never having heard them before. Kanati, he said, and my name in his mouth sounded like a statement of cosmic fact. Guardian of the hunt, you have come for the trespassers. It was not a question. He knew exactly why I was there, had probably known from the moment I entered his territory. I found my voice and answered in English, then repeated myself in the broken Cherokee I had learned from my grandfather. Tzul'kalu's expression of that massive, slant-eyed face could be said to have expressions showed something that might have been amusement. They walked in my domain without permission, he continued, his voice carrying the weight of mountain stone. They took images with their devices, sounds with their machines, claiming ownership of what has never belonged to the young race. What would you have me do with such thieves? The question hit me like a physical blow. I had come here expecting to rescue the Morrison family from a monster, but Tzul'kalu was presenting their disappearance as a matter of justice, of law enforcement on a scale I had never been trained to handle. In his world, the family had committed crimes that warranted punishment. In my world, they were innocent victims of circumstances beyond their understanding. Where are they? I asked, struggling to maintain the respectful tone my grandmother had insisted upon. Are they still alive? Tzul'kalu gestured toward the lean-to structure, and for the first time I noticed movement in the shadows beyond the entrance. 4 figures sat in a rough circle, their postures unnaturally still, their faces turned toward each other as if engaged in continuous conversation. But they made no sound, and they did not acknowledge my arrival even when I called their names. They live, Tzul'kalu confirmed. They experience. They learn what it means to exist as prey rather than predator, to be subject to laws larger than their comprehension. It is educational. The word educational in his ancient voice sent chills through me. Whatever was happening to the Morrison family inside that structure was not simple captivity. It was transformation, the slow process of being changed from human tourists into something else entirely. I remembered my grandmother's warning about the price of Cherokee protection, about the necessity of approaching this encounter with proper respect rather than the arrogance of modern law enforcement. But I also remembered my oath as a park ranger, my responsibility to protect visitors to these mountains regardless of their cultural understanding or lack thereof. "They are under my protection," I said, the words coming from some deep place I had not known existed. "I am Kanati, guardian of the hunt, and I claim responsibility for their trespass. If punishment must be given, let it fall on me instead." Something shifted in Sulkalu's massive frame. He leaned forward, studying me with eyes that seemed to look through flesh and bone to examine something deeper. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note I had not heard before, something that might have been respect. "You understand the old laws," he said. "You offer yourself as substitute, accepting the burden of their ignorance. This is the Cherokee way, the path of the true guardian. But do you comprehend the weight of what you propose?" Before I could answer, he gestured again, and the Morrison family rose from their seated positions inside the lean-to. But when they emerged into the moonlight, I saw what their education had accomplished. They moved with the jerky, uncertain gait of people whose minds were no longer entirely their own. Their eyes had taken on the blank, staring quality of sleepwalkers, and when 8-year-old Emma Morrison looked directly at me, I saw something looking back that was not entirely Emma. "They have begun the journey," Sulkalu explained with what sounded like pedagogical pride. "Soon they will understand their place in the true order of things. Soon they will no longer require the illusions of human superiority that brought them to my territory uninvited." The sight of the family in their altered state nearly shattered my resolve, but my grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. "Trust your Cherokee senses, the ones your grandfather taught you to use." I closed my eyes for a moment and reached out with the perception that existed beyond the 5 physical senses, the awareness that could read the deeper currents of spiritual reality. What I found was not hopeless. The Morrison family's essential humanity was still present, suppressed but not destroyed. Sulkalu's influence over them was powerful but not yet permanent. There was a window of opportunity, but it was closing rapidly with each moment they remained in his presence. I pulled the booger mask from my belt and held it up so Sulkalu could see it clearly. Recognition flashed in those ancient eyes, followed by something that might have been surprise. "You carry the face of the ancient compact," he observed. "The old agreement between my kind and yours, when your people knew their place and observed the proper courtesies. But that mask grants you safe passage, not authority over my domain." "Then I invoke a different agreement," I said, the words flowing from the same deep place that had supplied my earlier declarations. "I challenge you for their freedom. Single combat, according to the old laws, with the understanding that victory grants the winner absolute authority over the defeated." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. Sulkalu remained motionless for so long I began to wonder if I had somehow broken the rules of engagement without understanding them. Then slowly he began to laugh. The sound was like rockfall in a deep canyon, like wind through caves that had never known sunlight. When it finally subsided, he looked at me with something approaching fondness. "You truly are Kanati," he said, "the guardian who would face any threat to protect those under his care. Very well, I accept your challenge, with one modification to the terms you propose." My stomach dropped, but I forced myself to remain steady. "What modification?" "Victory in single combat will indeed grant authority over the defeated," Sulkalu agreed. "But the contest will be decided not by physical strength alone, but by understanding. We will share consciousness for the duration of one heartbeat-me heartbeat, which lasts as long as a human's held breath. In that time, you will experience existence as I experience it, and I will know the world through your perceptions. Whoever emerges with their essential nature intact will be declared victorious." The term sounded like death. To share consciousness with a being as ancient and powerful as Sulkalu, to maintain my humanity while experiencing reality from his perspective, it seemed impossible. But the alternative was to abandon the Morrison family to a fate worse than death, and that was unacceptable. "I accept," I said. Sulkalu nodded once, then rose to his full, towering height. "Then let us begin the sharing, Kanati. Let us see whether the guardian of the hunt is strong enough to hunt alongside the lord of all hunted things." He reached out with one massive hand and placed it on my forehead. The moment his skin made contact with mine, the world exploded into sensation and understanding that my human consciousness was never meant to contain. I experienced the forest as a living entity with its own intelligence and purpose. I felt the interconnected web of life that linked every plant, animal, and mineral in the mountains into a single, breathing organism. I understood the slow thoughts of trees, the quick, bright flashes of consciousness that belonged to deer and squirrels and birds, the ancient patience of stone and water. And I felt the terrible loneliness of being the only guardian of this vast, interconnected life, the only voice speaking for creatures that could not defend themselves against the relentless expansion of human arrogance. I understood why Tzul'kalu had taken the Morrison family, why he saw their casual photography and GPS mapping as acts of colonization, claims of ownership over what had never been owned. But as his consciousness flooded through mine, I felt him experiencing my own understanding of the world. The genuine love I felt for these mountains, the respect I had learned from my Cherokee grandfather, the deep commitment to protection that had led me to become a park ranger. He felt my certainty that humans could learn to walk in harmony with the wild world, that education and understanding could accomplish what force and fear could not. For one impossible moment, we were both guardian and lord, protector and protected, human and force of nature. In that sharing, I felt Tzul'kalu's surprise as he encountered the depth of my respect for the forest, my understanding that humans were not separate from nature but part of it, responsible for its welfare rather than entitled to its exploitation. When the connection ended, and I found myself standing alone in my own consciousness again, Tzul'kalu was looking at me with eyes that held something I had not seen before: recognition. "You truly are the guardian," he said quietly, "not the destroyer wearing a guardian's mask, but the one who understands the covenant between human and wild. The Morrison family will be returned to you, unharmed and unchanged. But know that their education is now your responsibility. They must understand why they trespassed, and they must promise never to repeat the offense." The Morrison family moved forward, as if waking from a deep sleep, their eyes clearing, their movements becoming natural again. James Morrison looked around in confusion, then focused on my ranger uniform with obvious relief. "Thank God," he breathed. "We got lost, and then we found this place, and there was this thing." His voice trailed off as he tried to process memories that would seem like dreams by morning. I looked back at Tzul'kalu, but the ancient guardian was already fading into the shadows between the trees. His voice reached me from the darkness one final time. "Remember the covenant, Kanati. Teach them to remember." By the time I led the Morrison family back to civilization, the sun was rising over the Nantahala Mountains. Their memories of the night had already begun to blur, transforming from sharp terror into vague recollections of being lost and confused in the dark. But I would remember everything: the weight of sharing consciousness with a force older than human civilization, the responsibility of standing as guardian between two worlds that had forgotten how to communicate with each other. When I filed my official report, I described a successful search and rescue operation in difficult terrain. The Morrison family had become disoriented in the dark, wandered off trail, and spent the night huddled in a natural shelter until I found them at dawn. It was a plausible story that satisfied the bureaucratic requirements without venturing into territory that would cost me my job and my credibility. But I also began a different kind of work, one that honored both my Cherokee heritage and my responsibilities as a park ranger. I started conducting educational programs for visitors, teaching them about the cultural significance of these mountains, the importance of approaching wilderness with respect rather than entitlement. I spoke about leave no trace principles not just as environmental protection but as acknowledgement of the living spirit that inhabits wild places. Some visitors listened politely and forgot my words as soon as they reached their cars. Others heard something deeper in my message, a recognition that they were entering sacred space that demanded reverence. And a few, the ones with eyes that showed real understanding, received additional guidance, warnings about places in the forest where the old laws still applied, where respect was not just courtesy but survival. My grandmother smiled when I told her what had happened, though I kept the details general. "The name chose well," she said. "Kanati knows how to walk between worlds, how to serve as bridge between human need and natural law. This is why you were born to be guardian." I still patrol the Nantahala National Forest, still carry out the ordinary duties of a federal park ranger. But I also carry something else: the knowledge that these mountains harbor powers and intelligences that existed before humans learned to make maps, guardians whose understanding of law and justice operates on scales beyond human comprehension. The Morrison family returned to their normal lives, probably never fully understanding how close they came to disappearing permanently into Cherokee legend. But sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in the ranger station, I receive calls from other parks, other rangers who have encountered disappearances that don't follow normal patterns, mysteries that resist conventional explanation. To them, I offer the same advice my grandmother gave me. Remember that we are guests in places older than our civilization, guardians of mysteries we are only beginning to understand. And when they ask how I know these things, I tell them my name is Kanati, and in Cherokee, that name carries the weight of ancient promises. The forest remembers. The old guardians are still watching, and some boundaries should never be crossed without proper preparation and deeper respect than our modern world knows how to give. But for those who understand the covenant, who approach wilderness as sacred space rather than recreational playground, the mountains will reveal wonders beyond imagination and protection beyond measure. The choice, as always, belongs to those brave enough to step off the marked trails and walk the shadow paths where Cherokee wisdom meets the raw truth of the wild world. In the end, that is what it means to be Kanati, to guard the boundary between human ambition and natural law, to serve as translator between ancient wisdom and modern need, and to remember that some names carry not just identity but sacred obligation to powers older than time itself.